Today, a very big downturn is affecting the European economy. Europe is on the verge of a looming financial crisis brought on by past overborrowing. As a matter of fact, the likelihood that this borrowing will end soon seems slim. This is because Europe's resource-depleting immigration dilemma makes borrowing unavoidable. As a result, many European countries will probably devalue their currency in this dire economic situation. In the past years, the world's reserve currency wasn't always the US dollar. Back then, other currencies from different countries, including France and the United Kingdom, held this position. In today's financial world, the dollar currency reigns supreme, but is not yet crowned. In a way, this means that other currencies aren't really a big threat to the dollar right now. For many years, the dollar has ruled the world's financial system. Currently, the dollar is used in approximately 90% of all currency transactions and makes up roughly 60% of the foreign exchange reserves held by central banks. The dollar's reserve position, however, started to deteriorate in 2014 when several significant global players started to stop using the dollar in their trade agreements. The process of de-dollarization was hastened by the war in Ukraine and the sanctions that followed. For starters, the Russian central bank's foreign exchange reserves were taken by Chinese officials after the invasion of Ukraine, which caught them off guard. Chinese assets may potentially be in danger if the US and China get into conflict. Globally, the US dollar's market share has dropped from 71% to 59% during the past 2 decades, and it may continue to decline. Since the use of currencies in international trade is a zero-sum game, the United States is the main loser in this situation. In the international market, a dollar is seldom traded for a yuan, real, or rupee as a reserve currency. At this point, if viable alternatives acquire traction, America's hegemony over the world economy will be threatened. Apart from trade agreements and international law, the U.S. today imposes sanctions on businesses and nations. They also exclude them from the global financial system at the drop of a hat, and they decide who they can and cannot trade with. Now, that goes much beyond the standard definitions of unilateral measures and restrictions. Ironically, Washington often talks about defending the international system based on rules at a time when it consistently breaks international law and trade regulations. And as Russia, Afghanistan, and Venezuela have discovered, the U.S. can easily seize their state property or force one of its allies to do so. In fact, Cuba was fully aware of it back in the 1960s. Due to the special status of the dollar, the United States may still have a long time to take advantage of its financial position on the international stage. However, the U.S. is lacking in perspective. At the end of World War II, the U.S. was willing to provide public goods while also seeking personal gain, which is why the rest of the world adored the dollar. More nations, particularly those in the global south, will look for alternatives when the latter surpasses the former for the U.S. Approximately 70% of the world's currency reserves were in U.S. dollars at the turn of the century. Even with all the news of de-dollarization today, the percentage is still just barely below 60%. The yuan, however, barely accounts for a meager 3%, so maybe the U.S. may be proud and complacent about it. However, things may develop gradually for some years before abruptly collapsing once an unpredictable threshold is crossed. That holds true for both financial regime changes and collapses as well as revolutions, and they almost always appear out of the blue. The United States' military and economic might being imposed on other economies has grown tiresome to economies all around the world today. Thus, efforts to dethrone the dollar are in progress. The founding of the BRICS Bank and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank had this as a major driving force, but it was not the stated aim. Even international organizations like the IMF are attempting to move away from a system in which the dollar serves as the exclusive reserve currency. The special drawing rights, a currency basket designed by the IMF, are criticized for having the potential to devalue the dollar. The fact that the dollar is the world's reserve currency gives the United States what some refer to as an extravagant privilege. All other governments require a reserve currency to trade for basic goods like gold and oil. Gold cannot be purchased by governments using Indian rupees or Iraqi dinars. The selling government's willingness to conduct business in local currency is improbable. The outrageous advantage is that whereas other nations must work and trade to obtain dollars, the U.S. can just create them out of thin air. Therefore, France must first find a way to make twice as much money if it wants to increase its oil importation. However, the United States can simply print the money and make any number of purchases. Therefore, it should also come as no surprise that the United States dominates the military might of the rest of the globe. Wars are won with money, and the U.S. has a seemingly endless supply at its disposal. Even the Red Army of the Soviet Union, which had much more troops on the ground, was unable to defeat the United States, which merely won the conflict by supporting uprisings in Afghanistan and other rebel-held nations bordering the Soviet Union in the 80s. The dollar has not always been the dominant currency in the world. Before World War II, this was the prerogative of the British. The British Empire's currency, pound sterling, was the de facto reserve currency at the time. The American dollar only dislodged it after the Bretton Woods Agreement. America was able to dislodge the British from the commanding position. However, the summary is that if America cut off the funding for debt for the British government, this would have forced them to pay high interest rates if they did not succumb to American wishes. The U.S. cut off the funding by threatening to dump piles of British debt on the market. They also blocked funding from American and world bodies like the IMF. The U.S. dollar is subject to decline, just as the British pound was. However, there hasn't yet been a competitive currency that has overtaken the dollar. There is a sizable quantity of American debt held by the Chinese. This implies that they may easily dump the debt and trigger an economic disaster around the world. However, compared to what Americans held for the pound sterling, the holdings represent a lower percentage. Furthermore, the United States used its power over the IMF as a major negotiating tool. The same may apply to a BRICS ban or an AIIB that could use its power to prevent funding for American debt. Recently, America has gone on a spending spree. In order to pay the interest on their previous debt, they must borrow $2 billion every day. Whoever controls those $2 billion has a significant impact on American policy. As a matter of fact, the BRICS and AIIB bank could just strengthen their influence over the local players rather than dethrone the dollar. The IMF's and thus the United States' influence on global affairs decreases as these banks get larger. This would be similar to removing the American hegemony gradually. The United States would first experience hyperinflation as a result of the dollar's decline. Many dollars are currently kept as reserves in banks in foreign nations. Over time, all of the money will flow back into the United States if it loses its reserve currency status. The United States economy will be destroyed by the abrupt increase in its money supply. Additionally, the unrestricted access to oil and other key commodities that America has enjoyed since the Bretton Woods Accord ended. This would make it even harder for the sector to operate normally. At this point, analysts are certain that the value of the dollar will decline. The real question is not whether the dollar will fall, but rather when, and who will succeed the United States as the world's leading superpower. In the long run, investors may benefit from diversifying their portfolios internationally if the dollar's strength continues to weaken over the course of 2023. But we still don't believe this will cause a significant structural shift in the global currency system. But even though the dollar is susceptible to changes, do you think this will mark the end of its dominance? We'd love to know your thoughts in the comments section. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you click the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to click the bell icon to stay notified. Have a great day, everyone, and thanks once again.